Okay, so this is the video for topic 1.5, the development for states in sub-Saharan Africa during the global tapestry period from 1200 to 1450. And this topic is going to be covered by two videos. So this is part one. So when we look at the essential question that we're trying to answer within this topic, we need to make sure that we understand the factors that contributed to the development of states in sub-Saharan Africa and how the governments of these states unified, ruled, and provide for their populations. So, when we talk about why states develop during this time period, states can develop during this time period for political reasons, such as safety, protection from a common enemy, or just generally providing order. There could be cultural reasons that motivate people to form states, meaning that they're protecting a cultural group based on religion or some sort of other culture. And finally, economic. People realize that agricultural production is better when they do it together, and that trade is much better when conducted under the rule of a state. So, when we talk about unifying, ruling, and providing, we're talking about unifying, we're talking about ruling, and we're talking about providing. So when we look a little deeper, anything that unifies is something that brings people together through some sort of common ethical behavior and identity. Usually, this is going to be a religion, but sometimes it's simply a culture. When we talk about rule, we're focusing on two things. One is the legitimacy of the government, meaning that this government has the right to rule, usually based in some sort of religion or some sort of strength that the ruler has. And because of the massive amounts of jobs that a government has to do, bureaucracies of highly educated government workers who do the day to day operations, they emerge as well. When we talk about provide, we always have to start with agriculture because we have to feed our people to be able to survive and prosper, as well as to move away from agricultural jobs and begin economic specialization. And then the last thing that helps provide is something that essentially helps bring in wealth. They could either produce things to trade, be the middlemen in trade, or be a market for traded things. So when we look at this topic, we're focusing on sub-Saharan Africa. So we've been through East Asia, we've been through South and Southeast Asia, Dar es Salaam in the Americas. Now we're looking at someplace very unique. And please don't forget that there is big time comparisons that we're going to be doing in topic 1.7. So back to our central questions. What you need to walk out the door with is number one, what factors contributed to the development of states in sub-Saharan Africa? Then the next video is going to talk about how they unified, how they ruled, and how they provided. So ultimately, to show that you understand this topic, one, you're going to need to be able to identify both the internal and external factors that led to the state development in sub-Saharan Africa. You're going to have to be able to locate the two areas of state development in sub-Saharan Africa and explain why they were there. You're going to have to explain how these states unified, ruled, and provided for their population. And then you're going to need to look at the bigger picture and explain similarities and differences between state building in this area, sub-Saharan Africa, and other areas of the global tapestry. So we begin with essentially a little bit of context. This is going to be a little bit different because I'm setting the stage for state development. State development in sub-Saharan Africa was much slower and much more unique than the rest of the world. And the reason why is two reasons. First of all, sub-Saharan Africa, Africa below the Sahara Desert, was very isolated. And whereas other areas had had contact with past classical empires, this place didn't. So when we talk about the isolation, first of all, we talk about The deserts. The deserts are very impenetrable. You see the Sahara on the left and you see the Namib on the right. And so essentially what's happening is this isolation is not allowing the ideas that are developed in other areas, the diffusion take place. Also, Africa is home of deadly diseases, both malaria and sleeping sickness, that somebody who lives there in Africa has a limited immunity, but somebody on the outside does not. So, the bottom line, this isolation prevented a lot of cultural diffusion of political systems and other things into the subcontinent. Also, another thing that made it slower and more unique was the fact that the land is very poor. Africa has a very, very, very narrow topsoil, which is important for agriculture, and this leads to great erosion. So, agriculture and land is not something that can essentially really provide wealth and for a market economy. But states did develop in African sub-Saharan Africa. And these are going to be those special kind of states that we talked about before. They're trading states. A trading state is a smaller political unit that developed during this time period, and it's powerful because it controlled access to or the production of luxury goods or simply trade. The two areas that we see state development are in the Sahel region, which is the borderline between the Sahara and the tropical rainforest, and along the east coast of Africa. So, when we talk about the specific factors that are going to lead to states in those two areas, we begin with, first of all, the internal factors of culture and the external factors of economics. So, when we talk about the cultural developments that are going to lead to state development, we have to talk about the Bantus. The Bantus were a migratory group of people who originally lived in Southwest Africa and migrated to other areas. And with them, they brought a very common culture. This culture was based on language, religion, and political organization. This political organization that the Bantus brought is called kin based networks. The book defines a kin-based network as a system of government that is based on family relations, and essentially the family rules itself. Well, this is going to be the foundation of all political systems within sub-Saharan Africa. So when we look at it, the kin-based system begins in the family. The family takes care of survival and prosperity, not just the nuclear family, but also the extended family, and usually is ruled by the eldest male. These families live in villages along with other distant relatives. All of these families can trace their origin back to a common ancestor. And these villages work with the families to promote survival and prosperity. They are ruled usually by a council of elders, meaning that the family heads get together and make decisions about survival and prosperity. But as the population of Africa grew, villages began to form into districts. This is simply a set of villages within each people of a common ancestor live. In a district, which is a set of villages in a geographical area, also are ruled either by an individual, being the eldest male, or by a council. So when we kind of look at why states developed, internally it was culture. Okay. This culture created a system of government called kin-based systems that is going to be based on relations. And as you go up the level from family to extended family to village to districts. These are all people that can trace their lineage to a common ancestor and work together for survival and prosperity. So internally, it was the Bantu culture and the kin based. When we talk about the external, it's going to be economic. Trading states in sub Saharan Africa developed in areas essentially that connected to trade. They're going to be led by chiefs, strong leaders who had control of the army. So during this time period, Africa was connected to what we're going to call the Afro Eurasian network of trade through two trade routes. This is the Silk Road, or excuse me, this is the Trans Sahara trade routes, and then this is the Indian Ocean system. Because these two areas connected to the rest of the world by trade, states developed in both of them because they were needed to conduct trade. So when we look at the specifics, in West Africa, you have civilizations such as the Hausa states, Mali, Ghana, and also Ethiopia that developed because strong leaders who had armies created a trading state that controlled trade for gold and other things that went into the Trans-Sahara system. Same thing with the eastern coast of Africa. Here we have the Swahili trading cities and Grand Zimbabwe that controlled trade in the Indian Ocean system. So to sum it up, the internal factor is going to be culture, in that these kin-based systems created a government on many levels that was based on relations, meaning that from the family all the way up to the district, and even the trading states that we talked about, they're all made by people who can trace their lineage to a common ancestor. So the Hausa state was a large tribe who could trace their lineage to a common ancestor. Same with Ghana, same with Grand Zimbabwe. Now, when we talk about the economic reason, we're only going to see states developed that were trading states in the two areas that connected to the trade routes. So we've answered half the question right now. We have basically displayed the internal and the external factors that contributed to state government. In the next video, we're going to look at their government to see how they unified, how they ruled, and how they provided.